Gallagher Amendment affects school funding, local ag, local business, and even development patterns here in Colorado. We have a guest speaker, Reeves Brown, the project coordinator for the Building a Better Colorado project. And he's, Reeves has served on former Governor John Hickenlooper's cabinet as an executive director of the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. And so he knows this issue inside out. It's going to be really a very good presentation, I believe. Very timely with the election coming up. Well, I want to go ahead and introduce today's speaker, Marcel Gaztambide, and he's the Animas Riverkeeper. And he joined San Juan Citizens Alliance in January 2017. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Geoscience, University of Utah. Before joining San Juan Citizens Alliance, Marcel worked as an editorial assistant for Journal of American Chemical Society, as a geologist for the USGS in South Carolina, and as a volunteer organizer for the Grand Canyon Trust. So let's all welcome Marcel here to our program.
Thank you, Kent. As Kent said, my name is Marcel Gaztambide, or Gaztambide, as Kent did the correct Basque pronunciation. I'll share my screen here so that folks can see the presentation. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. Yeah, before I get started on a talk about healthy rivers and healthy communities, which we're going to be talking about through the lens of the Animas River System and my Animas Riverkeeper program, I'd like to just acknowledge that this is a really stressful, painful time for a lot of folks. It's been a hard year. And I appreciate everybody tuning in for yet another Zoom meeting. I'm sure a lot of you are on a lot of Zoom meetings these days. And so thanks for taking the time with me. I just really appreciate it. And feel free to take a deep breath, stand up and shake it out. And yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you guys about what I work on. So as Kent said, my name is Marcel. I run the Animas River program for San Juan Citizens Alliance as your Animas Riverkeeper. Before I get into what that means, a little background on me. If you're wondering why my last name is so odd, it's because it's Basque. We're essentially a culture of cavemen that never left the mountainous region between France and Spain. A lot of Basques immigrated to the US to work as sheep herders, which is what my family did in the early 1900s. And some of them settled in Salt Lake City, Utah, and started the Utah Basque Club and the Utah Basque Dance Group, which I've been a member of since I could walk, essentially. That's me right there. It's a lot of fun. It's been a big part of my life. This is us dancing at a festival in Nevada. It was and still is a big part of my life, though I haven't worn the costume in a while. It probably would have been a good outfit for this presentation, maybe next time. But I was raised kind of splitting time between Salt Lake City and my family's horse ranch in southern Wyoming. My great-grandfather was a sheep herder here in this area in the 1920s, and we stuck around. We now raise and train American quarter horses. We also grow hay and alfalfa and oats. And this strip of foliage right here is Salt Creek, which is a tributary to the Bear River system. And I grew up kind of fishing and floating that stream. My dad in Salt Lake City built my childhood home along the Big Cottonwood River, on which I also did a lot of fishing and floating. And I suspect that both of these things probably contributed to me becoming the water nerd that you see before you right now. I stuck around in Salt Lake to study geology and geophysics, as Kent mentioned, at the University of Utah. This is my graduating class doing geologic mapping of the Raft River mountain range in northern Utah. That's me right there. Of course, I had to wear the Basque beret. Gotta let everybody know where you're from when you're Basque anyways. I probably don't need to tell any of you that Utah's an excellent place to study geology. This is the beautiful Bryce Canyon. I took this picture a couple years ago. And as part of my undergraduate studies and part of what led me to the water world, I participated in an international scientific effort that was looking at water quality in heavily mining impacted areas in Ecuador. We were primarily tracing mercury in the environment, but we were also collecting human hair, toenail samples, fish samples, and tracking bacterial contamination of community wells. We're studying rivers like this, and you'd be forgiven if you think this is in Silverton, although these plants don't really make any sense and there's no mountains back here. But this picture is actually of the Rio Chico, which was one of our primary study rivers in Ecuador. It's dumping into the Rio Chama, which has high quality water, and the Rio Chico is really heavily mining impacted. This watercolor probably looks familiar. It looks kind of like the Gold King mine spill, right? And what I like about this picture, as sad as it is to see a river this color, is that it was my first lesson in how universal water challenges are, right? No matter the country, we have a lot of the same challenges. Here's a picture of Silverton, which is a very similar image, right? You can see this is Cement Creek dumping into the Animas River. Very similar challenges all around the world when it comes to water quality issues in rivers. And this trip to Ecuador really sold me on not only wanting to be an earth scientist. I just really, really enjoy geology. I enjoy earth system science. It's really fascinating to me. But it also really helped me understand how important science is to maintaining the health of our communities. And these are folks that live downstream of that confluence of the Rio Chico and Chama that I just showed you. And they've been really heavily impacted by the mining activity upstream of their community. After we completed our study and did our analysis back in the United States, we sent it to the mayor of this community so that he could better advocate for changes that he felt needed to be made, which is similar to what I do now as Animas Riverkeeper. Both during and just after my geology studies, I worked on the editorial staff for the Journal of the American Chemical Society for 5 years, which is based out of Salt Lake City. And then I got a job as a hydrogeologist for the USGS, which was just a killer job. This was my office on the Saluda River doing data collection in Columbia, South Carolina. And my desk was in the South Atlantic Water Science Center, also in Columbia. And I worked on various projects there, all surface and groundwater focused. And as my time in Ecuador kind of cemented my desire to be a scientist, this really cemented my desire to work on rivers specifically. But I miss the West, right? I miss the mountains and the desert and the dry heat, emphasis on dry heat, which is what ultimately led me to San Juan Citizens Alliance and the Animas River. This is a picture up above Eureka, up above Silverton on the Animas River. And at San Juan Citizens Alliance, we advocate for clean air, pure water, and healthy lands, because those are really critical, we think, for healthy communities, ecosystems, and economies, which is what we're going to be talking about today through the lens of the Riverkeeper program. And shortly after joining San Juan Citizens Alliance, we worked with Waterkeeper Alliance to bring back an Animas Riverkeeper program. That's supposed to be me. If I go like this, maybe it looks like me. I say bring back because I'm not the first Riverkeeper. The first was Aaron Kimple, who now works for Mountain Studies Institute. He was the Animas Riverkeeper, gosh, maybe almost 10 years ago now, I think. If you're unfamiliar with Waterkeeper Alliance or what Riverkeepers do, it's an international group of dedicated water body advocates that prioritize the health of waterways and by extension, the health of their communities. We're a super diverse bunch, but all of our work across 6 continents is advocating for the health of our unique water body, with our main goals being achieving and sustaining drinkable, fishable, swimmable water as a human right. So for today's presentation, we're going to do a very quick overview of the Animas River system through the lens of our Riverkeeper program. And then since this is the Green Business Roundtable, we're going to touch on the resilient economy piece of the Alliance mission statement. And I'd like to at least start a conversation with you folks about what I think is the real economic value of having a healthy river. For a quick overview of the Animas Riverkeeper program, and I apologize if I'm speaking quickly, I have a lot to get through, but feel free to follow up with questions if I speak too quickly through something. Quick overview of our program, or rather your Riverkeeper program, because the Animas is a public river that belongs to all of you. We take a 3-pronged approach to issues. We focus on water quality, water management and policy, and river access and recreation. And I could talk about any one of these things for hours on end, but today we're going to try to focus in on some of our management and policy work. I probably won't have time to talk about our recreation work, but we do fun stuff like organize overnight group trips between Durango and Farmington, New Mexico downstream. We also put on a raft race between Aztec and Farmington for Farmington's Riverfest. And another thing I'll mention that I like to think about with our program is the intersectionality of all of these elements. I'm a millennial, so we like terms like intersectionality. And I think it's common sense to think that water quality can be impacted by the water management and policy decisions that we make. Water management policy decisions can impact river access and recreation. I think there's a lot of interplay between these 3 elements. So starting with some basics, this is my office now. This is the Animas River Watershed. And I love this image. It looks almost like arteries, right? Or lungs, like lung tissue. And you can see here where it gets really, really thick with a lot of rivers and streams. This is all forest land. About 46% of the Animas watershed is on forest land. And that's part of what I think makes the Animas kind of a magical, resilient river, right? It's able to sustain a Gold King mine spill or the impacts that we saw from the 416 fire just a few years ago. I think it's really important that we have this really healthy system that feeds high quality water and allows us to sustain those impacts. And it's also really important that the Animas has no dams along the entire run of the river, right? It's a free flowing river, which is really important to keeping it healthy. And there are just not many free flowing rivers left in the world. So it's special. I am biased, but I do think it's a very special river. Some fast facts for the river. It's 126 miles long, descends nearly 6,000 feet. It's part of the really important Colorado River system that's helped supply water to 40 million people in the Western US. It's been the lifeblood of human populations in the San Juan Basin for thousands of years, well before any of us Basques or other Europeans came over to the States. It's home to thousands of plant and animal species. It's been 4 years since I've been working on it, and I got them all counted. There are at least 90 mammals, 33 amphibians and reptiles, 41 fish, and 189 birds. So really biodiverse, which is a good sign of a healthy system. But unfortunately, like most rivers, it's facing some difficult challenges, right? We have water quality impairments for metals, nutrients, sediment, temperature, and bacteria. And in the 10 years that I've been working on rivers and water issues, I've never seen a system that doesn't struggle with at least a few of these, if not all of these issues. So they're very common, but they're things that we need to work on. Our metal issues are primarily at the headwaters of the river up here and extend down through Durango. And our nutrient, sediment, temperature, bacteria issues really exist from at least Hermosa Creek, which is about right here, down through Durango, which is about right here, further down through the Southern Ute tribe, into New Mexico, through Aztec, which is about right here, and then down into Farmington, which is right here, before it empties into the San Juan River, which is what this scar is. I'd say about 75% of my time is spent working on and addressing these pollution issues. And across the board, I do that with a lot of partners and through a lot of collaborative efforts. I made an attempt here at writing down all the areas that I work in and the people that I work with on water quality issues. And there's a lot of interplay between a lot of these groups and a lot of these projects. But for today, we're going to quickly look at something I've done on my own, which we're calling the Animas Riverkeeper mapping project. It's an interactive online map that I'm using to organize the issues facing the river and the projects that are trying to address those issues. And I started that mapping project, one, because I love maps and I think they're a great way to inform people, and two, because I hated this map. This is a map generated by EPA of the Bonita Peak Mining District site at the headwaters of the Animas River, where we have a mine cleanup taking place. And it's just not a great map, right? You can't zoom in on any of these things. You can't see any of the names of any of the mine sites. You can generally see where they are, but it's not very helpful. So I set out to make a better one. I've been working on it over the last 4 years, not just for the Superfund site, but for the whole watershed. And this map isn't fully complete, though many people, especially San Juan Citizens Alliance members, partners that I work with, have the link to this map already, and I'm happy to share it with all of you. It's built on Google My Maps, so it's online, it's interactive, it's downloadable. To show some of the functionality of the map, here's a zoom in on the Superfund site. So comparing this to EPA's map, I think this is a lot better. You can click on individual sites here. You can see that the layer for the Superfund site is clicked on. You can zoom in right down, even closer than I've zoomed in here for this screenshot, and you can click on individual mine sites. And the idea is that you click in on a site and it gives you kind of information about the site, maybe some water quality issues that we have there. The Bonita Peak Community Advisory Group, which I helped set up to provide a citizens kind of oversight platform for the Superfund process. All of those CAG members have this map, and we find it very useful. I think it helps in understanding the water quality issues, but also how different pollution sources might relate to one another. I just think it's a great way to stay informed and to stay knowledgeable on issues impacting our watershed. Clicking on the water quality layer, you can see what reaches of the river have specific water quality impairments. For this reach from Silverton up to about Middleton, on the main stem of the Animas River up above Silverton, we have issues with silver, zinc, manganese, and this water quality layer extends all the way down through Farmington. Give you an idea what that looks like. This is through Aztec, New Mexico. You can see here where we have issues with E. coli and sediment. And these yellow polygons here are areas that the San Juan Watershed Group has identified Russian olives that need to be removed. And so we're expanding this to kind of show what projects exist, show where work needs to be done. Shout out to Alyssa, the Watershed Group coordinator, who I think is on this call. She does really great work down there and is one of my really important partners in mitigating some of the pollution issues we have downstream. And I wish we had more time. I'm going to have to scroll through a bunch of this quickly or Kent's going to get mad at me. So I'm going to go over 25 minutes. But you can see some of the other functionality. I've got layers like this one that show all the tributaries to the river and all of the ditches that take water out. Here's a layer that shows all the active and inactive mining permits in the state of Colorado. You can see some of the other layers here, like places and borders, roads and rail crossings, projects and partnerships, events in the watershed. So yeah, I'm excited about this map. We are going to have it up on the SJCA webpage as soon as possible. But in the meantime, I'm happy to share the link with anybody that's interested. And it will hopefully provide insight, right, into all of these other elements of my work. I also have a recreation map that gives rapid scouting information, river access locations, river mileages. We're not gonna have time for that today. I'm so sorry. But if you stick around after the presentation, we can maybe talk about it a little bit. But we have to move on to the business piece of the Green Business Roundtable discussion, which is the economic value of a healthy river, or at least what I think the value might be. I'm not an expert in any of this. I'm very much a water quality nerd, but I think it's easy to wrap our heads around ideas like this. Most of you probably already intrinsically understand the value of a healthy animus. We've seen impacts of when we've had bad pollution, like the Gold King spill and what that can mean. But one thing to think about a healthy river is through a concept called ecosystem services. And as defined by the US Department of Agriculture, ecosystem services are the benefits that people obtain from ecosystems. An ecosystem being a community of people, plants, and animals and microorganisms interacting with one another in their non-living environment, in this case, water. And the way that scientists and economists have kind of broken up ecosystem services are through breaking them up into 4 categories. One being provisioning services, right? The provision of food. We use Animas water to grow crops, to grow produce, providing fresh water for humans, animals, and plants. In Durango, we don't get all of our drinking water from the Animas, but down through Aztec and Farmington, it's their primary drinking water source. Regulating services might include things like accommodating waste. All of our wastewater treatment plants dump their treated water into the Animas, which has to accommodate those nutrients. Regulating services also include things like hazard mitigation, right? It can be a buffer for flood events if we have a healthy river system with healthy wetlands, healthy floodplains. It can sustain fire impacts, it can sustain mine spills, help regulate things coming into the river. And supporting services like nutrient cycling from agricultural operations or from our wastewater treatment plants, provide support for aquatic habitat for fish, bugs, other water critters. And cultural services, which are sometimes hard to put a dollar value on, unless you're talking about recreation and tourism. That's what we would consider to be a cultural service. But things like inspiration is hard to put a dollar amount on, right? I don't know about all you folks, but I've been doing a lot of walking of the river trails in either here in Durango or down in Farmington, especially this year. It's been a nice way to get out. A really, really important resource. And then also science and education. Some of the partners I work with at Mountain Studies Institute are especially good at this, using the river to teach lessons about science and teach lessons about the value of rivers. So, having said all of that, I'm sorry I'm going quickly, but some of the things that I worry about and that I think about through the lens of our Riverkeeper program, things that are threats to those ecosystem services that keep me up at night sometimes, and I wish that was a joke, but they really do sometimes, are pollution and overdevelopment, right? And both those things have real costs attached to them. We know that pollution has a real cost. We're going to talk about Gold King and mining impacts in a second. But other costs of pollution might be things like impacting agricultural operations, or pollution can shut down or discourage recreation, which we've seen on the Animas before. Algae blooms from nutrient issues can gunk up water infrastructure or impact aquatic habitat. And for the most part, rivers can handle pollution like that, dilute it, recycle nutrients, et cetera, only if they have the healthy flows to do that, right? And so overdevelopment, taking too much water out of the river, has a real cost, and it impacts the pollution. If we have less water in the river just doesn't really work how it's supposed to. So for the Riverkeeper program, one of the ways we try to protect ecosystem services, besides my water quality work, are management and policy work. These are some of the things that I work on. And for today's presentation, we're going to take a look at Colorado mining law reform, which we helped pass last year, and the Southwestern Water Conservation District. Before we get into the mining reform, let's talk a little bit about Gold King, which I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with. EPA triggered a breach at the Gold King mine in 2015. sending millions of gallons of wastewater and many tons of metals into the system. And one way to look at what that cost our communities is to look at the lawsuits and filings for damages that followed the spill. We had $318 million in economic losses from businesses and landowners downstream. $1.9 billion was filed from the state of Utah, Navajo Nation, $162 million, New Mexico, $130 million, New Mexico residents, another $120 million, 295 Navajo farmers are still seeking $75 million, totaling about $2.4 billion in damages just from that one event. For the Bonita Peak Superfund site, so far trying to mitigate some of the problems that we have upstream, we've already spent $75 million, and the EPA has plans to spend another $65 million over the next few years. For comparison, the Summitville Superfund site, which is to the east of us here, that cost $250 million for a site that's much smaller, much less complex than what we have at the headwaters of the Animas, and it required a $19 million treatment plant that costs $2.2 million a year to run, and it will have to run forever. $2.2 million times forever is a lot of money, right? And what's cheaper than all of that is avoiding pollution in the first place. We've long recognized that we have an issue with legacy mines and mining impacts in the West, but the industry has advanced and best practices have improved, and we can better protect our water resources compared to anything we've done before. And so myself and a broad coalition of environmental advocates from around the state of Colorado set out to better protect our water from mining activity. And we did it through passing this bill, HB 191113, signed into law last year in April. The bill essentially did three things. It made it so that new mines in the state of Colorado need to include water quality protection in their bonding process, or the process of setting aside money to clean up water when the mine closes. That was best practice, but now it's enshrined in law. New mines need to demonstrate before they begin mining that they're not going to have a perpetual water treatment issue. In the past, some mines were designed to perpetually pollute, and the mining company had no intention of treating that water forever, which was an issue. That's no longer allowed in Colorado. And then we also outlawed the rarely used practice of self-bonding, where companies pass their own internal financial test, and basically they would promise that they'll be good for the cleanup money when the mine closes, but it's just that, it's a promise, and it's backed by no recoverable assets or real financial resources. And the problem there is companies go bankrupt, right? The probably poster child for this problem is Peabody Energy. When they went bankrupt in 2016, they left communities with billions of dollars in cleanup costs, backed by no real money or assets. And that all falls back on the taxpayers. So moving forward, at least in Colorado, we'll avoid these problems altogether and hopefully save incalculable amounts of money. This was accomplished with a large coalition of environmental groups, as I said, but also with broad community support. You'll see a bunch of companies in Colorado that signed on, including farms, a Durango Compost Company, San Juan Angler, Mountain Waters Rafting, Four Corners River Sports. A lot of local governments and agencies also supported. Really broad support, which was critical in getting that passed. The other issue I mentioned that keeps me up at night was overdevelopment. And you can't talk about water development or money in the water world, really, at Southwest Colorado, without talking about the Southwestern Water Conservation District. If you're unfamiliar, the SWCD is based here in Durango, and they're a policy-making body chartered by the state legislature, whose statutory authority is to protect, conserve, use, and develop the water resources that we have. They have 9 representatives from 9 counties within their boundaries, including La Plata, Dolores, San Miguel, Archuleta, Hinsdale, Mineral, Montrose, Montezuma, and San Juan. Again, it's not an elected body, but they are appointed by elected officials. But they do have taxing authority. The district operates primarily using tax dollars from a mill levy and property taxes across the 9 counties, with a little less than 50% of their tax resources coming from La Plata County, or $750,000. Since La Plata County is the largest population, that's where they get a lot of their funding. And they're a very busy bunch. It would take me a long time to list everything they do. But to name some of the really great stuff, they support water quality research in our region. They fund some of the USGS gauges we have on the Animas. They fund the Water Information Program, which is great, puts on the Children's Water Festival every year, and much more than that, which I've been very vocal in supporting when they use their money in ways that I think help our communities. But they also fund some stuff that I think deserves scrutiny. For example, they use their lawyers to actively fight nearly every in-stream flow proposal that the state of Colorado has ever made in the Southwest District. If you're unfamiliar with the Colorado In-Stream Flow Program, it allows the state to legally set aside river flows for the benefit of the natural environment. A really important thing, considering what we just talked about and how important healthy flows in rivers are. And another concern of mine, beyond that, which the Alliance has been involved, butting heads with the district for many years. Another concern is they actively support deregulation, including the recent changes to the Clean Water Act, which remove protections for 18% of stream and river miles and 51% of wetlands in the US. Again, that's concerning, right? We just talked about some of the consequences of pollution. I did it briefly, but I could go on for a long time. This decision to support those changes was not unanimous on the board. San Miguel and San Juan counties representatives voted against supporting the rollbacks. But when I approached the Plata County's representative on this board, I was told, and I quote, that I knew nothing about Western water issues, and that was the end of that conversation. I tried to follow up again with the Plata County's representative, and the second time that I tried to talk to him about it, he said there's nothing to talk about. And I would argue that we can do better, right? With a body that's supposed to represent the communities in Southwest Colorado. I think that it's a priority for us to have smart regulation on water quality. But perhaps the most important thing, and my primary concern that brought me to every one of their meetings over the last 4 years at the district, is that they have plans to take additional water out of the Animas. They hold 40,000 acre feet or so of water rights on the Animas, which were carved off of the ALP project, which built Lake Nighthorse right here. And everything suggests they plan to pump water out of the Animas River through a pipeline that's listed right here. This is from one of their settlement agreement documents, in order to move water from the Animas Basin over to the La Plata Basin. This is concerning when I think about the many water quality problems that we face and how every single one of them will get worse if this project moves forward. I regularly attend their public meetings, and I'm often the only member of the public at those meetings to make sure that their board hears concerns like mine. And I will be very vocal when they do move forward with this project, but it's worth our community paying attention to things like this, I think. We're also working on a webpage for the San Juan Citizens Alliance website that will highlight a lot of this. But in general, I think it's critical, right, that the public has a say in projects like this, and that the health of the Animas is made a priority, or if any river in Southwest Colorado is a priority when we make development decisions that will impact the health of our waterways. And I think we're better off when entities like SWCD hear from their constituents on issues like this, which probably includes a good number of you on this call right now. And so some finishing thoughts. I know that was fast, I only had 25 minutes, but I think we all benefit from thinking about these things, right? From knowing what water quality issues exist, from supporting efforts to fix those problems, from considering some of these ideas around the importance of healthy systems when we make decisions that will impact those systems. I think the health of a community is directly tied to the health of that community's environment, and the health of a local economy is tied to the health of a community. So by the transitive property of healthy environments, trademark pending, a healthy environment contributes to a healthy economy. And as another kind of just finishing thought, when I think about pollution, I think it's also important to think about how vulnerable communities are more impacted by pollution than others. Over the last 4 years, I've met houseless individuals along the Animas River that fish for their food out of the river, right? That's concerning given some of the water quality issues we have, or they boil Animas water for drinking. That's unhealthy and unsafe. There are families that swim and play in the lower Animas River down in New Mexico, and we have E. coli issues there sometimes. That's a direct threat to their health and a threat to their ability to use their waterway. And so the ways that pollution and overdevelopment impact us are numerous, but we need to understand them, which is a big goal of my Riverkeeper program. And the other goal is to take steps to improve those conditions for the benefit of everybody. And it's a really important step in sustaining ourselves in the long term. So that was all I had. We're not gonna have time to talk any recreation stuff. I'll scroll quickly through all these fun pictures of the river. Carl Schnittker, who I think was gonna be on this call, he took these photos for us. Thank you again, Carl. From our group float, from our raft race down in Farmington. We do fun stuff. It's not all water policy and water quality. I find that stuff exciting. I know not everybody does. But yeah, I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm gonna stay on this call after this presentation. If anybody wants to talk about things, we can scroll through that Riverkeeper map. Yeah, that was quick, but I did it in 27 minutes, Kent. I'm sorry, I'm 2 minutes over, but I was close. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, and I'll stop talking a million miles a minute and let you guys get some questions in.
Awesome. Good work there, Marcel. That's great. Let's see. I know a couple folks have questions, and several of you had pretty much exactly the same question as well. So let's see if I can get that queued up for everyone. Just a second. Well, I might have to ask on the behalf. Marcel, a few folks asked who was our representative and what is the process for the Southwest District representative?
Sure, yeah. Our representative for La Plata County on that board is Robert Wolf, goes by Bob, has been on the board for quite a while. He's the president of the board, actually. And the process for him being appointed to the board is through the county commissioners. County commissioners appoint representatives to the Southwestern Water Conservation District Board. And that's true of all of the 9 counties. County commissioners appoint their representatives to the board.
Yeah, thanks. 3 or 4 of you had that question. And someone else asked for a link to the maps. Could you tell us again how those will be available?
In fact, I can drop a link to this draft map in the chat here so that folks can look at it. Know that it is a draft and there are still some things that haven't been added yet, but it's going to be a living map that I'll update as our projects progress and whatnot. So let me copy that here. Copy link. So this is our Riverkeeper map. And then for folks that might be interested, here's a link to the recreation map, which again, a lot of Alliance members already have these links and have been using them. Partners that I worked with also use these maps. They are still a work in progress, but once they're more, I guess, fleshed out and ironed out, we'll have them on the Alliance webpage for folks. And I'll be giving updates on the Watershed, kind of using the maps moving forward.